So here I want to use two metaphors to kind of describe my sense, or maybe kind of an insight or an outlook on what the personal development process is, the growth process, the deep inner transformation. Call it the hero's journey, call it the spiritual path, call it emotional maturity. All different descriptions, I think, for what is ultimately the same thing. And the two metaphors that come to mind speak to it as kind of an emergent phenomenon. And the metaphors are of an archaeologist and of a sculptor. So picture an archaeologist who's seeing a big red mound of dirt, and they've done some scanning and they've realized that there's a beautiful, say, T-Rex skeleton inside of it. We have a sculptor who's got this huge, 10-foot tall rectangle of marble, and the sculptor has been studying it and has this vision of a figure that they want to carve out of that block. In both situations, what the archaeologist and the sculptor are going to do is they're going to go through the kind of covering, right? The hill, they're going to move the dirt away to allow the skeleton to emerge, right? The sculptor's going to go and chisel and hammer and sand and brush the marble away to reveal the statue that they see as a potential inside of it. And I think the process for us really works similar to that. I think sometimes it's tempting to think of it more as like an upgrade or a transition or a transformation. And there's truth to all of these approaches. I'm not saying that they're wrong, but I think if we get confined to those, it's easy to turn it into another kind of striving game. Whereas what we see it more as is a process of time and intention and desire, time being the time necessary for the artist or for the archaeologist to remove those parts of the scene that are not, to reveal the part that is for them, right? The skeleton, the sculpture. And then if we think of ourselves, right, as being, you use the archaeological example, both the skeleton inside, right, that's ready to emerge back into the light, right, the being that the skeleton supported died millions of years ago, and the skeleton has since been lying in the earth. You could think of it in a way kind of waiting to be rediscovered, this time by the archaeologist, to kind of have its new life after death, as kind of a look back to the way things were. And the hill is kind of the protector, the preserver of those bones, the fossilized remains, until they could be discovered. And we are that skeleton inside, and we are also that mound of dirt. And what can be painful about the process is, to get to that skeleton, at first they may start kind of blasting the hillside, depending on how deeply it's embedded. The archaeologist will then start kind of chiseling or hammering away. And then as they get very, very close to the skeleton, they'll really start delicately brushing that dirt away. And what's kind of wild and sometimes disorienting and painful about the experience is we are simultaneously the skeleton and the dirt that's being moved away, right? We're the sculpture inside of the marble and the marble that's being hammered and chiseled and sanded away. And so that's why I think the process can feel like a dying or an obliteration or a removal, because we're identifying with those parts of ourselves that are being put aside to reveal this new potential or new discovery that's lying hidden within the mass. And really on the deepest level, we are also the archaeologist and the sculptor in this example, which I think is maybe our spirit self, our God self, which is acting in and through nature to reveal this deeper expression, this more authentic and deconditioned expression of ourselves, this more natural expression of ourselves. And it is going through the painstaking process, applying its skill and its artistry and its expertise, but then also applying its patience and its diligence and its dedication to bring that through, to bring that forward, to bring it out. And what's kind of dizzying as we go deeper into the process is to notice our consciousness, our awareness, and its ability to actually move between those different perspectives. To occupy and to inhabit the perspective of being the skeleton, feeling it's kind of buried, feeling it's encased, waiting for the light, maybe beginning to sense the light coming toward it gently, but still feeling trapped. And then also to feel like that dirt, right, or that marble being removed, being obliterated, being blasted away, and the pain and the confusion and the disorientation of that. And then to also feel like we are that hand that is moving the chisel, moving the brush, those eyes that are seeing the hill, seeing the block of marble, and seeing that potential inside, and then seeing the, you can call it progress or the development of the unfolding in time of its emergence. And that could be a beautiful perspective from which to view things. The difficult part is viewing it from that perspective and then viewing it from the, angel inside the block, right? Or the, the being or whatever is being carved by the sculptor inside the block still. And the density of that and the trapped feeling of that. And then to alternate between those, sometimes rapidly, sometimes slowly. And then again, between the part that's being removed, I think this metaphor for me just really kind of captures and honors both the magnificence and awe-inspiring nature of the process, the beauty and the artistry of the process, but then really the difficulty, sometimes what feels maybe kind of like a tediousness of its unfolding, where you can simultaneously have a sense of what's going on, but then for me feel a frustration and an impatience and even kind of an angsty, almost like a claustrophobia, being like, okay, well, hey, like I see this potential. Can the artist, can the archaeologist just get me out already? Like, I want to be in the light, the sculpture. Can I already be on the pedestal, under the spotlight in the gallery or in the museum or wherever? And the surrender is surrendering to the fact that it is a process in time, that it's not something that can be rushed, that if it's rushed, it won't unfold properly, right? The bones will be damaged. The sculpture won't have its form, its true form, in all its beauty. And to then take it to another level, I've been using kind of a maybe spiritual or divine framing of this, but to also see it as an unfolding of time, right? Everything is the Big Bang happening. Every time we scratch our ears or turn on our turn signal or take a sip of water, that's the Big Bang happening as much as the explosion at the beginning of everything. It's all still the Big Bang unfolding. And this process too, this gradual kind of unearthing from within ourselves of this new potential we have, which isn't a different being. It's not like a different us comes online. It's just the same being in the same world experienced through what I think is ultimately a broader, more loving, more accepting, more peaceful, and more clear perspective. You can think of it as kind of the difference between experiencing the world looking through a peephole, and then kind of maybe looking through binoculars, then maybe, that metaphor can kind of get a little squirrely on me, but eventually getting to the point where we're opening the door that had the peephole and actually beholding the world instead of being so confined in the perspective, which we have, which we were born in, and which we've been conditioned to have. And that this process of deconditioning is what essentially kind of brings us out of the peephole and in more into a open view of the world. And I think the beauty of it is, from that perspective, the world really feels much more like home, and our bodies feel more like home. Instead of feeling like home is what we're protecting and we're looking through that peephole trying to look for dangers or opportunities and things like that, while simultaneously being behind our door, we're just more at flow and more a part of this whole. We recognize, we are the Big Bang. This entire universe is the Big Bang. Why are we seeing ourselves as something that needs to be confined and hidden and protected? And why do we see the world as something we kind of got to go out and venture into to get what we need, and then we retreat back to our places of safety? I mean the literal physical home. I also mean the mindsets we have that serve kind of like this confining home, the behaviors and attitudes we have that, again, can seem like home, but really are more of like a prison for us, or more like that block of marble or that hillside that we're contained in. So the process and the unfolding of it, I think, is ultimately a beautiful and a liberating thing, but being in the thick of it, as I think we all are, and as I certainly feel like I am, just want to honor the artistry of it, the gradualness of it, the unfolding of it, and the difficulty of being inside of it, and of experiencing those different perspectives, and then trying to also then feel like one thing. And that variability of the perspectives is part of what can make it so difficult, so taxing and trying, and really kind of frustrates our sense of self. But maybe that's part of the real beauty of the unfolding too, is that that's part of what's getting us to unglue our eye from that peephole and to accept, hey, there is another way of being in the world. There is another perspective through which we can experience ourselves in what is, again, not a different world, not a different us, but a radically different experience of ourselves and of the world, and of being ourselves in the world. And that, as beautiful and open as that is, the process of transitioning from one to the other can be a very painful process, can feel like being torn apart sometimes, can feel like being scrambled, reassembled, jumbled, shaken in the martini shaker. I mean, it really can be discombobulating and painful and miserable. And so maybe these metaphors can be something to kind of return to in those difficulties, or return to when I'm feeling disoriented, just to provide me a reminder of what's going on, and really to remind myself that that suffering and that impatience and that frustration and those difficulties are not bugs in the program, aren't flaws in the process, are actually a necessary part of the process. And if I can't in that moment recognize or appreciate it, that's really an opportunity to lean into faith, and to lean into humility, and lean into surrender, and to allow with a certain degree of trust, and then to also give myself the permission to emotionally release a lot of that pent up frustration and resentment at the process, and how it feels sometimes, and how agonizing it can be to be in the mind, as the mind is essentially being radically rearranged and still clinging to its old way of doing things. I mean, again, this is the mind that chooses the peephole, right? Wants to have that peephole behind the door because it's convinced that there are real threats and real dangers in the world, such that it would justify being locked in, right, through life. Right, that the world would be so potentially hostile, so potentially dangerous, that would be a loving choice. And that's an expression of deep, deep beliefs, and deep, ultimately, I think, confusions and misunderstandings, but a deeply held outlook and mindset toward existence, really. And that what I think is happening in us as a species is we're beginning to move and transition into that broader way of being. And what that involves, it's not at least for me and for a lot of other folks who I sense are going through this, it's not a Thanos snap of the finger, we open our eyes and we're there. Maybe for others it will be. Maybe for others it already is. But I know for a lot of us, it's very gradual and very painstaking. And I pray that I honor it, and I pray that we all honor it.